Before fast food chains and processed meals filled our tables, Native American tribes across North America had perfected cooking techniques that sustained entire civilizations for thousands of years. These recipes were not just food. They were medicine, culture, and survival all wrapped into one. And most Americans have never heard of a single one of them. Here are 25 Native American recipes you will wish you knew sooner. Starting at number 25, we have cedar plank salmon. And the moment you understand how this technique works, you will never cook fish the same way again. Pacific Northwest tribes like the Chinook and the Nez Perce had already mastered the art of cooking salmon in a way that locked in every drop of moisture and infused the flesh with a depth of flavor that no modern method has ever truly replicated. Fresh cedar planks get soaked in cold water for several hours until completely saturated. The salmon gets laid directly on the wet wood and placed beside an open fire, not over it, so the heat wraps around the fish rather than blasting it from below. As the cedar heats up, it releases its natural oils slowly, and those oils rise through the salmon in a gentle, fragrant smoke that smells like a forest after rainfall. The fish never dries out. It never toughens. It just softens slowly into something so tender it falls apart when you look at it. Pacific Northwest tribes considered salmon sacred, and the first salmon ceremony held every spring was one of the most important events of the year, a ritual of gratitude to the fish that kept entire communities alive through brutal winters. Number 24 is maple sugar candy, and before European settlers ever tapped a single maple tree, Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee tribes across the Great Lakes had already built an entire seasonal food system around maple sap refined over generations. Families traveled to traditional sugar bush camps and worked together for weeks, collecting sap in birch bark buckets and boiling it down with hot stones dropped directly into wooden troughs. The boiling takes an enormous quantity of sap, roughly 40 gallons to produce a single gallon of syrup, and continuing to boil past the syrup stage produces something extraordinary. The sugar crystallizes into a soft, crumbling candy with a richness and complexity that modern processed sugar cannot come close to touching. Maple sugar candy was used to sweeten teas, season meat, preserve berries, and trade across vast networks. Children ate it as a treat, elders used it as medicine, and the entire community came together to make it in one of the most joyful seasonal traditions on the continent. Number 23 is sunflower seed porridge, and this one is going to surprise you because the sunflower you think of as a garden decoration was one of the most important cultivated crops in North American history, domesticated by indigenous farmers over 4,000 years ago. Plains tribes like the Hidatsa and Mandan grew enormous fields of sunflowers and processed the seeds into a thick, warming porridge that served as a staple breakfast across much of the continent. Making it starts with roasting the seeds over low heat until they turn fragrant and golden. The roasted seeds get pounded between stones into a rough paste rich with natural oil, then stirred into simmering water and cooked until thick and creamy. Some tribes sweetened it with maple sugar or dried berries. Others added dried meat for extra protein. Sunflower seeds are one of the highest natural sources of vitamin E on Earth, and the porridge made from them provided anti-inflammatory benefits that modern nutritionists are only beginning to fully understand. Number 22 is venison jerky with wild herbs. And before you think this is just dried meat, understand that the preparation methods used by Cherokee and Haudenosaunee tribes turned simple preservation into something closer to an art form. Lean cuts from the hindquarters of a deer get sliced along the grain into long, thin strips, then rubbed with dried sumac for tartness, wild garlic for depth, and juniper berries for a piney resinous note unlike anything in a modern spice rack. The seasoned meat gets hung on wooden racks over a low, smoldering fire, fed with hickory for sweetness, or wild cherry wood for something fruity and subtle. The drying takes days and requires constant tending. The finished jerky is dense and dark and intensely flavored, nothing like the soft, sweetened, mass-produced jerky in gas stations. A small strip carries enough nutrition to satisfy hunger for hours, and the wild herb crust delivers a complexity of flavor that no factory process has ever come close to replicating. Number 21 is wild mushroom and hominy soup, And this combination represents something genuinely profound about how Native American cooks thought about food. Hominy, corn treated with wood ash in a process called nixtamalization, was one of the greatest nutritional discoveries in human history. The alkali treatment unlocks nutrients in the corn completely unavailable in untreated kernels, dramatically increasing protein digestibility and adding calcium that kept bones strong across generations. Combined with wild mushrooms foraged from forest floors across the eastern half of the continent, the soup that Cherokee and Muskogee cooks produced is still one of the most nutritionally complete single-dish meals ever conceived. Wild mushrooms have an umami intensity that makes grocery store varieties taste like wet paper, and the broth that results from simmering them with hominy is dark and rich and deeply savory. The kind of soup that feels like medicine, because it essentially is. And speaking of medicine disguised as food, wait until you hear about number 15, because what those tribes were making from something most people walk past every single day will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Number 20 is roasted camas root. And if you have never heard of camas, you are not alone, but tribes of the Pacific Northwest considered this small blue-flowered plant so valuable that wars were fought over the meadows where it grew. The traditional preparation involves digging a pit in the earth and lining it with flat stones heated in a fire for several hours. Camas bulbs get packed in tightly, covered with damp grass and earth, and left to cook in that sealed underground oven for up to 3 days. The long, slow heat converts the complex carbohydrates in the bulbs into simple sugars that no quick cooking method can replicate. What comes out of the ground is dark and sticky, and tastes almost like molasses, mixed with sweet potato, rich and caramelized, and unlike anything you would expect from something that looked like a small onion going in. Nez Perce and Shoshone tribes dried roasted camas and pressed it into cakes that could be stored for years and reconstituted into a sweet paste whenever needed. Number 19 is bison heart stew, and every Plains tribe that hunted bison operated on a philosophy of total use, where nothing from the animal was wasted. They considered the heart the most nutritious and spiritually significant part of the entire animal. Bison heart is an incredibly dense muscle, far leaner than modern beef, with a deep, rich flavor more intense than any roast you have ever made from a grocery store cut. Traditional preparation involves slow cooking the heart whole in a broth made from bones, wild onions, and prairie turnips, those knobby little roots that grew in abundance across the Great Plains and tasted like a cross between a turnip and a water chestnut. The heart simmers for hours until the dense muscle softens into something tender enough to slice easily, absorbing the savory depth of everything around it. The prairie turnips thicken the broth gradually into something closer to a stew than a soup. Lakota hunters often ate the raw heart of the first bison of the season as an act of respect and gratitude, but the slow-cooked version that fed families through winter is a meal so nutritionally complete that modern functional medicine practitioners would struggle to design something better. Number 18 is Cherokee bean bread, and this is one of those dishes where the simplicity of the ingredients makes the depth of the result almost shocking. Dried beans get cooked until completely soft and mashed into a thick paste while still warm. That paste gets folded into cornmeal dough until the two become one cohesive mixture, denser and richer than either ingredient alone. The dough gets shaped into small oval loaves, wrapped tightly in dried corn husks, and dropped directly into boiling water, where they cook for about an hour. What comes out when you unwrap those husks is something that looks modest, but tastes like sustenance in its purest form. The exterior has a slight chew from the cornmeal. The interior is creamy and dense from the beans, earthy and satisfying in a way that makes you understand immediately why this was a staple food for generations. Cherokee women made bean bread in large quantities because it travels well, keeps for days without refrigeration, and provides the kind of slow, steady nutrition that hard physical days demand. Number 17 is Hawthorn berry sauce, and this one connects to a tradition of using wild fruit as medicine that runs through virtually every Native American culture on the continent. Hawthorn berries ripen in autumn in dense red clusters on thorny shrubs growing at the edges of forests and along creek banks across most of North America. They look like tiny crab apples and taste deeply tart with a mealy apple-like flesh that becomes extraordinary when cooked down slowly into a thick garnet-colored sauce. Ojibwe and Potawatomi cooks used hawthorn berry sauce the way modern people use ketchup, as a condiment that went on game meat, fish, and grain dishes. But unlike ketchup, hawthorn berries are one of the most well-documented heart medicines in traditional healing systems around the world. Modern research has confirmed that compounds in hawthorn berries lower blood pressure, improve circulation, and strengthen blood vessel walls. Indigenous healers knew this long before any laboratory confirmed it, because to them, food and medicine were never two separate things. Number 16 is smoked whitefish with sumac, and this combination of technique and seasoning represents a level of culinary sophistication that would earn serious respect in any professional kitchen today. Great Lakes tribes like the Ojibwe developed smoking techniques so precise that fish preserved this way lasted through an entire winter while still tasting extraordinary. The whitefish gets butterflied open and rubbed generously with ground sumac, that tart reddish spice made from dried berries that tastes like lemon and pomegranate combined into something more interesting than either. The seasoned fish goes onto wooden racks above a carefully controlled fire built from green alder or wild cherry wood, both chosen because they produce a cool, fragrant smoke that dries the fish slowly without cooking it too fast. Over 1 to 2 days, the flesh transforms, the outside developing a mahogany-colored crust, while the inside remains tender and moist and deeply flavored all the way through. The sumac caramelizes slightly in the heat and becomes almost jammy, tart and sweet, and deeply aromatic. And coming up at number 10, you're about to discover what Plains tribes were making from something so ordinary that you have almost certainly walked past it hundreds of times without ever imagining it could feed you. Number 15 is Tepary bean stew, and this small, hard, unremarkable-looking legume might be the most underrated food in the entire history of North American agriculture. Tepary beans were cultivated by the Tohono O'odham people of the Sonoran Desert for over 5,000 years, surviving in conditions that would kill virtually every other crop on Earth. No irrigation, no fertilizer, no rainfall for months at a time. The beans come in colors from white to deep speckled black, and all of them share a creamy, dense texture when cooked and a rich earthiness that deepens the longer the stew simmers. Traditional Tepary bean stew begins with soaking the dried beans overnight, then cooking them slowly with wild desert oregano, cholla buds, and dried venison or rabbit. The desert herbs perfume the broth in a way that smells nothing like anything in a grocery store spice aisle, wild and resinous and intensely aromatic, like the desert floor after the first summer rain. Tepary beans contain higher levels of protein and soluble fiber than almost any commercially grown bean available today, and their glycemic index is so low that diabetic researchers have begun studying them as a potential tool for managing blood sugar in modern populations. Number 14 is wild grape dumplings, and this is one of those recipes that stops people the first time they hear it because it sounds too good to be true. Wild grapes grow in dense tangles across the eastern woodlands, smaller and more intensely flavored than anything. Number 12 is fire-roasted agave hearts, and to understand why this food matters, you need to picture something that looks like a massive artichoke at the base of a century plant in the southwestern desert. The agave plant spends anywhere from 10 to 30 years storing energy in its dense fibrous heart before sending up a single enormous flowering stalk and dying. Apache and Yavapai tribes harvested these hearts just before the plant flowered, when all that stored energy was at its most concentrated. The heavy outer leaves get cut away to expose the pale, dense heart underneath, which can weigh anywhere from 10 to 80 pounds. Those hearts get packed into large earth ovens lined with hot stones, covered with grass and earth, and left to roast for 2 to 3 days. What happens inside that sealed pit is a slow caramelization of extraordinary complexity. The fibrous, starchy heart softens completely, and its carbohydrates convert into simple sugars that concentrate in the heat until every fiber is saturated with something that tastes like dark caramel crossed with molasses with a faint smoky edge underneath. The Apache considered fire-roasted agave hearts essential winter provisions, and the communal roasting event that produced them was one of the most important social gatherings of the year. Number 11 is wild rice and duck soup. And this pairing is so naturally perfect, it almost seems like the landscape designed it deliberately. Wild rice grows in the same shallow lakes and river edges where migratory ducks stop to rest during their autumn journeys south. Ojibwe hunters harvesting wild rice from birch bark canoes were surrounded by ducks, and the soup combining these two wild ingredients became one of the most celebrated dishes in the Great Lakes food tradition. The wild rice gets parched first over a low fire, deepening its nutty flavor before going into a broth made from the duck carcass, simmered for hours with wild onions and dried mushrooms until the liquid turns deep amber. The duck meat gets pulled from the bones and returned to the pot in tender shreds. The wild rice swells and splits open, releasing a starchy creaminess into the broth that thickens it slightly without making it heavy. The finished soup makes you feel genuinely restored after eating it, not just full, but actually well, which is exactly what it was designed to do for communities preparing for the long, cold months ahead. And just ahead at number 10, you are about to discover what Plains tribes were making from something so common it grows in almost every yard in America, and it will completely change how you look at the ground beneath your feet. Number 10 is lamb's quarters soup, and that plant growing in the cracks of your driveway and pushing up through the edges of your garden that you have been pulling out and throwing away every single summer is one of the most nutritious wild greens on the entire continent. Lamb's quarters grows virtually everywhere across North America as what most people dismiss as a common weed. Yet it contains more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach, and more protein than almost any other wild green you can find, growing without any human assistance whatsoever. Cherokee, Lakota, and Comanche cooks used it the way modern cooks use spinach. But the soup they built around it was something specific and intentional. A broth gets made first from whatever bones are available, simmered low and slow until golden and rich. Fresh lamb's quarters leaves go in near the end, just long enough to wilt and release their mineral-dense nutrition into the broth without losing their bright, clean flavor. Wild onions, dried corn, and sometimes a handful of dried beans round out the soup into a complete meal that costs nothing if you know where to look, and delivers nutrition that most modern meals cannot approach. The fact that this ingredient grows freely in almost every backyard in America right now, while people pay premium prices for kale at grocery stores, is one of the more quietly absurd ironies of modern food culture. Number 9 is Chokecherry Wojapi cake, and this takes the sacred berry sauce from earlier in our list and builds something more substantial around it that served as one of the most important ceremonial foods across Plains culture. Wojapi in its sauce form was already deeply significant, but dried into a concentrated cake, it became something that could travel, last through winter, and be carried on long journeys, and reconstituted with water into something that tasted like summer in the middle of the coldest February imaginable. The process starts exactly as Wojapi does, chokecherries crushed and cooked low and slow until they thicken into a dark jammy sauce. But then the cooking continues far past the sauce stage, the liquid reducing down over hours of patient tending until it becomes so concentrated it holds the impression of a spoon drawn through it. Number 7 is fry bread with wild plum jam. And fry bread is a complicated and deeply emotional subject within Native American communities that deserves to be handled honestly. Fry bread was born not from ancient tradition, but from survival under the worst possible conditions. When the United States government forcibly relocated tribes onto reservations and replaced their traditional food systems with commodity rations of white flour, processed lard, and sugar, Native women turned those inadequate ingredients into something edible. Fry bread was an act of resilience, making something from almost nothing and refusing to let that be the end of the story. The dough comes together from flour, salt, baking powder, and water, pulled into small rounds and stretched thin, before dropping into hot fat where it puffs and blisters and turns golden in under a minute per side. What elevates it into something genuinely special is the wild plum jam served alongside it. Wild plums grow in thickets across the Central Plains, small and tart and intensely flavored, and cooked down with a touch of maple sugar into a thick jewel-colored jam, they become something no grocery store preserve has ever come close to matching. Spread generously on hot fry bread, wild plum jam turns an act of survival into an act of joy, which is perhaps the most Native American thing possible. Number 6 is roasted sunflower and corn succotash, and succotash is one of those words most people recognize without having any real idea where it came from. The word comes from the Narragansett language of New England, and the version that eastern woodland tribes actually made was far more complex and interesting than the pale frozen vegetable medley that inherited the name in modern cooking. Roasted sunflower seeds get prepared first, spread over hot flat stones until golden and fragrant. Fresh corn kernels go into a clay pot with dried beans, wild onions, dried sumac for tartness, and whatever herbs the season offers. The sunflower seeds go in near the end, adding a richness and nuttiness that transforms the dish from something simple into something layered and deeply satisfying. Wampanoag and Narragansett families ate versions of this succotash at communal gatherings that European arrivals in the 17th century observed and misunderstood as primitive meals. What they were actually witnessing was a perfectly balanced nutritional system: complete protein from corn and beans, healthy fats from sunflower seeds, vitamins from wild herbs, and acid balance from the sumac, all assembled from ingredients gathered within walking distance of home. And that brings us to the final 5, and number 5 is going to introduce you to a drink so refreshing and so deeply tied to summer gatherings that entire communities planned around the moment it could be made. Number 5 is sumac lemonade, and the moment you taste this for the first time, you're going to feel genuinely angry that nobody told you about it sooner. Staghorn sumac grows wild along roadsides and at the edges of forests across the entire eastern half of North America. Its distinctive velvet-covered red berry clusters so common that most people drive past them thousands of times without ever once considering that they are looking at one of the most refreshing natural drinks the continent produces. Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Cherokee people had been making this drink for centuries before the first lemon ever arrived on this continent. And what they produced from those wild red clusters is so naturally similar to lemonade in flavor and appearance that the comparison is not an exaggeration. The berry clusters get broken apart and submerged in cold water, never hot because heat destroys the delicate acids that give the drink its tartness, and left to steep for up to several hours. The water turns a beautiful deep pink as the natural acids leach out of the berries, and when strained and held up to the light, it looks exactly like a glass of pink lemonade. The flavor is tart and slightly astringent with a fruity depth that plain lemon juice never quite achieves. It provided vitamin C in significant quantities at a time of year when people needed it most, and it tasted so good doing it that children drank it eagerly without any persuasion required. Number 4 is bare root soup, and this is where food and medicine connect so completely that trying to separate the two becomes meaningless. Bare root, also known as osha root, grows in the high mountain meadows of the Rockies and the Southwest, and the smell of it when you first encounter it is genuinely startling. A deep, complex, earthy aroma with notes of celery and something almost medicinal underneath, like the forest flora concentrated into a single root. Apache, Pueblo, and Zuni healers considered bare root one of the most powerful medicines available, using it to treat respiratory infections, digestive problems, and the deep fatigue. Number 2 is wild turkey and corn stew, and the reason this sits at number 2 is because it represents something that connects almost every Native American food tradition across the entire continent into a single bowl. Wild turkeys are lean, intensely flavored, and deeply satisfying in a way that their factory farm descendants simply are not, with dark, rich meat that stands up to long, slow cooking without falling apart. Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw cooks built a stew around this bird, combining it with dried corn, wild onions, and sunflower seeds into a pot that simmered for hours until everything melded into something greater than the sum of its parts. The corn swells and releases starch into the broth, thickening it gradually without any flour needed. The wild onions dissolve almost completely into the liquid, leaving their flavor behind without their texture. The turkey meat shreds into long, tender fibers that absorb the broth so completely that every spoonful delivers meat and liquid simultaneously. Sunflower seeds stirred in at the end add richness and a gentle crunch that keeps the texture interesting all the way to the bottom of the bowl. This stew was made for community, produced in large quantities, and eaten together, the act of sharing it as nourishing as the food itself. Number 1 is Three Sisters soup with cedar ash salt, and this sits at the top of this list, not because it is the most complex or the most nutritionally impressive, though it is both of those things, but because the story behind it is the most human, the most heartbreaking, and ultimately the most hopeful thing on this entire list. Corn, beans, and squash were not simply crops to the Haudenosaunee people. They were living relatives, gifts described in creation stories as given directly by the earth to sustain human life. And that spiritual relationship shaped every aspect of how these plants were grown, harvested, prepared, and shared for over 1,000 years. When the United States government systematically dismantled indigenous food systems in the 19th and 20th centuries, the loss of the Three Sisters was not just a nutritional tragedy. It was a cultural severing, a disconnection from identity so profound that its effects are still being felt in Native communities today in the form of epidemic rates of diabetes and food insecurity that come directly from the replacement of traditional diets with processed commodity foods. The soup made from these Three Sisters, corn and beans and squash simmered together in a broth seasoned with cedar ash salt, made by burning cedar branches and dissolving the ash in water before evaporating it into crystals, is one of the oldest continuously made recipes on the North American continent. The cedar ash salt adds a mineral complexity and faint smokiness that no modern seasoning replicates. The beans and corn together create complete protein. The squash adds sweetness and vitamins and body. And the broth that holds everything together tastes like something your body recognizes even if you have never eaten it before. Warm and deep and grounding in the way that only food made with genuine knowledge of the land ever manages to be. Across Native American communities today, there is a growing movement to reclaim these traditional foods, to bring the Three Sisters back to indigenous tables, and to reconnect people with the agricultural wisdom that sustained their ancestors through everything history threw at them. When you make this soup, even in a modern kitchen with imperfect store-bought ingredients, you are participating in something that refused to disappear. You are eating resilience. You are eating memory. You are eating 1,000 years of people who loved each other enough to feed each other well. Now leave a comment below and tell us which one of these 25 recipes you are going to try first, because somewhere in this list there is a flavor that has been waiting for you for a very long time.